And time to welcome in our next live guest of the afternoon. We've got Austin Bass joining us, who is Market Research Manager over at Ogara Jets. And Austin, thank you for being here and for taking the time to come on Business Air TV to talk a little bit about what Q4 is shaping up for the market.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Austin, I want to start with what you're seeing is on the market right now. A couple of weeks ago, we had Michael Barber on, who was talking about some of the different aircraft that are staying on the market for a little bit longer than they did earlier this year. It seems to be that there is a certain segment of the heavy jet class that is staying on the market. Wanted to see if that's still the case. We're right in that window of wrapping up, finalizing aircraft purchases so that they can get pre-buy inspections done and fly that first flight before the end of the year. Wanted to get your first person take. You're on the ground, you see what's happening. What's on the market right now?
Yeah, so across the board, we're seeing supply kind of rise a little bit. As is typical Q4 fashion, we see supply start to level off and then fall towards the end. So to your point, the heavier stuff, the 550s, the globals, they saw supply build. We're really starting to see them come off the market a little bit now. But it is a little unusual in that space to see supply build to this point in the year, where it typically starts to fall off as they have a strong Q4. The segments we're really seeing that are a little bit of concern are the kind of the older vintage and the higher time aircraft. So when you're looking at the 20-year older aircraft and then the higher time aircraft as well, you're seeing fleet percentage for sales around 5 to 7%. Where the rest of the market's average is around 4.5%. So those are kind of the markets we're looking at right now as the biggest concerns.
So a 5 to 7% being above kind of the rest, what are some of the causes for that? Are people thinking that they can't get them repaired, can't get overhauls, or overhauls becoming more expensive? What's some of the drivers for causing that supply being online for a little bit longer?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a multiple, a series of issues. What we really saw was pre-pandemic. This is kind of typical where I don't want to call them the less desirable, but really the older and higher time aircraft really were out there for longer and typically were a larger percentage of the fleet that were available. What we're seeing now is as the market kind of normalized from the pandemic time, so 20 to 21, it really was across the board, the markets came down. So there wasn't a distinguishable difference between your basically new to 15-year-old aircraft to really those 20 and 20 plus year old aircraft and higher time aircraft as a whole. So what we're looking at there is they're kind of starting to rebound. And that's kind of the turning point that we're looking for next year. Especially rolling through the first and second quarter, is those are going to be the leading indicators for the rest of the market in terms of their health. So to your point, there's a lot of factors in that, whether it be they can't get parts, pre-buy slots. They're really the aircraft that appreciated the most in terms of percentage basis. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but you can't really nail it down to one thing.
So, Austin, as we move out of 2022 and into 2023, obviously, a lot of folks are genuinely concerned about the greater macroeconomic environment right now. When we're looking at how that coincides with your aircraft sale market, what are you guys seeing? Is there any type of hesitancy as we start to inch closer and closer to a true consumer recession?
Yeah, so it's kind of a bag of mixed emotions in the market. From our perspective, we don't think there's going to be an imminent reset. We do believe values are inflated and they're higher than they will be in the coming years. We think it's going to be a more gradual adjustment. I don't know that anyone here is taking the stance that there's going to be a precipitous fall into residual values, barring an economic black swan event or something like that. In terms of values, I'd expect on average you're going to see between 5 to 7.5% depreciation over the next year or something to that tune. Obviously, it's going to depend, but in terms of residual values as a whole, especially the new segment and the 0 to, like I said, 15-year-old aircraft, they're situated pretty well. You're still a couple of years out from being able to get a new aircraft from an OEM. So to that extent, those values are going to be insulated a little bit more than those older aircraft. But to your point, I think there is going to be some impact to the larger market as a whole. There's going to be more competition, and then in conjunction with that, you'll see values and pricing start to come down.
So as we look at Q4 year over year, we're halfway through the month of December, so we're wrapping up Q4. What are the numbers looking like on your end? Maybe what you're seeing from other dealerships and other groups, maybe in the IATA group or in others. What are you seeing as far as volume goes for transactions compared to last year?
Sure, it's definitely down. I'd say as a percentage of the whole, we're only about 65 to 70% of all the total transactions. With that said, I think we're about 80% on pace to hit what we were last year. So I think as a whole, we'll be down maybe 15, 20% year over year. It'll be a noticeable difference. However, keeping in mind that this is still well above pre-pandemic levels and in a normalized market, or what we considered a normalized market, this year was still very healthy, and Q4 was no different.
Yeah, we heard from Chairwoman Zipporah Marmer a few weeks ago that Q4 last year is really not something that we can ever compare in the past or will ever be able to compare to in the future. So that's not as alarming. I think that as we head into crossover the bonus depreciation threshold, as we see a little bit more supply coming online, as maybe valuations start to not necessarily recess back to where they were, but compress from that rapid expansion that they've had over the last 2 years, that next year, we may see a little bit of a normalization, maybe a leveling out. As you look towards next year, maybe first half of next year, do you expect for transaction volume to decrease over the first 6 months of next year?
That's a good question too. It's kind of a crystal ball issue. So the larger thing we typically see, aircraft sales, is kind of a cyclical, I don't want to call it a monster, but it's pretty cyclical. Q1 through Q3 tend to be a lot slower, obviously, than Q4. The big thing we have looking forward is we know the number of new entrants into the market in terms of buyers. So those first-time buyers, it's down significantly, but again, still well above pre-pandemic levels. So when the market normalizes, that normal, I guess the norm is going to be probably a good bit higher than it was previously. And then conversely, we do have a lot of people kind of on the fence talking about they want to wait until values are lower or pricing is lower, and then they'll be at the point where they'll be ready to pull the trigger. So with that said, it seems like there's still a fair amount of demand out there. Whether that turns into actual transactions and those people convert, we'll have to wait and see. But I think as a whole, we're poised to be in a pretty healthy spot. While saying that, supply is definitely going to start coming back, and we do anticipate values will conversely start to lower a little bit.
Austin, for those folks that are sitting maybe on the fence, deciding whether or not to pull the trigger on making that purchase, what is one of those biggest reasons keeping them hesitant from going all in on this right now, do you think?
Yeah, the big thing we've been hearing is, are we at the top? Are we the big comparison being 08, 09? Granted, I don't think we're anywhere near that in terms of the severity. We're in a much better position with the OEMs. We're in a much better position in a marketplace as a whole. Really, it is people are just not willing to pay the premium, and they think it's going to go down. Now, with that said, if everybody thinks that everyone's going to be trying to buy when the prices are coming down, so it may not work to that effect. And we had this same issue on the front end too, where people thought they were afraid to pull the trigger because they thought they were buying in at the top of the market over the last 2 years. And someone who bought a plane in 18 months ago is very well situated compared to where prices are right now. So it really is kind of a crystal ball question in terms of people pulling the trigger and what's going to push them over the edge. It's really something on there, and they can answer. It's not a market dynamic as a whole that's influencing them.
So how are you tracking first-time buyers and maybe their stickiness in the market? I would imagine that first-time buyers that may have newly accumulated income or maybe new entrants might be the first to go, maybe a first-in, first-out type problem. How do you track some of that information for those new buyers that are coming in versus, the retiring of a fleet? Maybe somebody is no longer needing to use a business aircraft. What are some of those metrics that you can follow and that you can actually track?
Yeah, that's a good question. To kind of answer your question in a more roundabout way, I don't think we're so concerned with the number of aircraft or rather first-time buyers purchasing aircraft and then turning around and selling them. I don't think that's the greatest risk. What we've really been seeing is kind of a mix between the charter markets and first-time buyers really driving that demand up and really thinning out that supply. In terms of what you're looking for in regards to those, I guess, two segments specifically and what's going to affect those aircraft coming back to market, in theory, what I'd be looking at is flight time. Are these aircraft sitting around? again, the parts issue is another big thing. If you're seeing aircraft sitting and people not being able to fly, I think that's when people realize that the costs associated with them start building up, and that might be a leading indicator. But in terms of, I guess, a more macro effect, I don't know that there's one specific statistic that you can look at.
So your KPIs that you're looking at have more to do with total hours flown on the fleet as opposed to, some of the actual, purchasing and selling of aircraft when you're looking at, the macro jet environment. Is that kind of what you're saying?
To some degree. There's a couple different things you can look at there too. So obviously segments of an industry, if they're not doing well, those are going to be the first to be affected. Conversely, the light jets typically are the most price sensitive, as they are the lowest capital cost. And then again, your older vintage. So really, if you have an owner operator or somebody who's not using their aircraft, granted, if they are just someone who likes to have an aircraft on hand and they may not fly it that often, that may not be a big deal. But if you have somebody has an aircraft and it's not sitting, or they don't have the money to put into it, those are the segments we're really going to be looking at. So it may be the total flight hours. It may be the segment of the industry that they're playing in terms of their business. I don't know that there's one specific area you can drill down into and say that's going to be the leading indicator, though.
All right, Austin. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on the show. If people want to reach out to you guys and learn a little bit more about what's going on in the market, where can they go to do that?
Sure. It's ogarajets.com, OGARAJETS.com.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks so much, Austin. We appreciate it. And we will be sure to have you back on sometime next year and see how our crystal ball looked.